It's Christmas Day evening, and I'm standing on the top of a old hospital. And the gentleman I'm talking to, I don't know his name because he won't really engage with me. In fact, we've spent most of the evening chasing him round the old block of the hospital on many floors with many fire exits. And I remember arriving, and as I arrived, it must have been about 11:30, 11:45, just the end of Christmas Day. And as I walked under this big arch, this big concrete arch that they had, if you imagine, pretty old building, and he was on top of it about 4 meters up, and he was doing handstands along it. So I was like, well, wow, that's amazing. How on earth do you do that as he was doing that? But also, wow, that's really precarious. I think I'd really like to talk to this gentleman and see what's going on. And so eventually we managed to, I won't use the word corner because I believe that he chose where we ended up having a conversation, and it was right on the very top of this building. Now, negotiators in the UK, we generally work in pairs, so you always have somebody who's safe with you. But on this particular occasion, dealing with this particular gentleman, the partner that I'd been working with, he'd taken an instant dislike. She hadn't done or said anything to attract it, but he just, for some reason, didn't like her, and he would refuse to speak when she was there. So I had a uniformed officer with me, young in service. I said to him, look, I'll negotiate if you can just be with me. And that was it. That was my briefing. So that was mistake number one. Mistake number one was not informing the other person or giving them clarity in a briefing about what they should do in this situation. And we're standing at the opposite end of corridors. And I want you to imagine that there's these great big fans, like industrial fans at each end of the corridor. And as we're having the conversation, I can barely hear him. And I can barely hear him because he's standing shouting at me, but there's a fan behind him. So all I'm getting is words rushing past me. And I remember saying to him, look, I'm really sorry, I can't hear you, and I can hear you've got something important to say. And as I said that, he literally started running, walking really fast towards me, something I wasn't expecting. And I remember glancing around and I'm like, oh, hang on a sec, there's nobody with me. And there's nobody with me because I haven't told the uniform officer to stick right with me as safety precaution. I have got negotiator's creep, which means I have stepped towards him to try and hear what he is saying, and I've completely disengaged with my surroundings, which is, as you can imagine, quite dangerous, especially when you've got a big drop on one side of you. I'm not very strong. I'm 5'7". I'm about 9.5 stone. I'm never going to win in a fight. So he comes right up to me, literally right up to me. I can feel his breath on my face. We are toe to toe, nose to nose. And I'm standing there, I haven't got my stab-proof vest on, so my mum would not be impressed, for starters, if she ever finds that out. I didn't have my handcuffs with me, I didn't have anything, because I just had gone for a conversation. And as we're standing nose to nose, I remember him saying this to me. He said, I'm not going to hurt you. Now, as you can imagine, my heart is pounding, I'm sweaty, I'm stressed, all my flight instincts are kicking in. I remember thinking, okay, he's not going to hurt me. And I just said this to him. I just said, I trust you. And he stepped back. And I was like, wow, okay. So for about a minute and a half, I was between, well, what am I going to do? What happens if we have a fight? Where am I going to go? How's this going to look? Oh my goodness, I could die. Where's the other officer? Oh my goodness, I haven't briefed him. But in that moment when he said that, when he said, I'm not going to hurt you, and the way he said it, and I know nothing about this gentleman, but I did trust him. I trust that he wasn't going to hurt me, because he could have done quite easily. So he steps away and he opens this fire exit door, and behind the door are a load of uniformed officers there for my protection, there for my safety. And one of them has got a taser. And I remember he opened the door and she shouted, taser, taser. And he slammed the door and he looked at me. And I'm like, honestly, I didn't know anything about this. I didn't know they were there. We're just having a conversation. Now, what I didn't know was that he was going to be arrested because he'd caused some criminal damage at a police station before this incident.
Right.
So I didn't have all the information as we're having this conversation. And for some reason, and I've got no idea why he did it, whether it was his way out of the situation, whether he'd made that decision, actually, I want this to be over. He just opened the door again, and of course he got tasered straight away. He got arrested and he was taken downstairs. But I found out later that his story was, because I believe we all have a story, but I found out later that his story was that 5 years ago, he had bipolar, he had been sectioned, and he had missed his best friend's wedding on this Christmas period. So he had turned up on Christmas Day at the hospital to give out gifts. He'd arrived very late, obviously. They weren't going to let him in. And so this was his frustration about what was going on. And he'd been to the police station beforehand and caused some criminal damage there because he felt they weren't listening to him. Yeah, I
Oh,
should always remember that, especially as we approach, well, 6 weeks, 7 weeks to Christmas, is it?
yeah.
Yeah.
That story, when I read that in your book, stood out. Well, there's many stories that really stood out, but the position that you were in that moment where words had so much power, where you saying, I trust you, was the turning point in that situation for your safety and a de escalation of that situation. And it's an honor to speak with you, Nikki, because I work in the world of leadership development. I have done for over 20 years. A lot of the work that I do is conflict resolution. When I have to mediate between two people who are, there's tensions, there's difficulties, and they need to be overcome for strategic goals to be hit, for harmonious working, for productivity. And trust is such a huge part of that, and the words that we use is such a huge part on that of that. And so that's why I'm really excited to speak to you today, because you work within this world now, and we can talk about that a little bit more. But I'd really love to dig into this amazing, incredible experience you have and draw out some themes. And I think the first one, which I actually took a screenshot of in your book, was that you described yourself as a human being with an impulse to rescue others. Now, I know your path, and this isn't going to be a standard interview where I ask you the whole history of what led you to be where you were in the position that you held. But there's certain personality traits and characteristics that lend themselves to that role of crisis negotiation. And I guess in some way it is a need or want to rescue others, because otherwise you wouldn't have been drawn to that position. However, that's not necessarily healthy, productive.
Mm.
The solution in life, in leadership, in romance, and in the situations that you were in. So what did that feel like for you, in terms of, was that something you were always conscious of, to not rescue? Or did you find yourself doing that and having the mindset of that in some situations?
Yeah, so in negotiations, I've done quite a lot of work on myself around personal development, around how my mind works, around self awareness, and that's how I know I'm a rescue personality. You know, I'd like to say I'm cured, but you only have to look at my household where I've got 4 dogs. One's a rescue, one's a rehome. I've got two rehome pigs. I've got 4 rehome goats. So I still satisfy my rescue personality need in different ways. In a negotiation, it's not about me rescuing the other person.
Hmm.
It's about them taking action for themselves. And I think for anyone that's in the coaching business and the leadership business, we often see that, don't we? Sometimes we try and fix people's problems, we problem solve for them. But we know when we do that from our perspective and not from the other person's perspective. So it might work for us, but doesn't necessarily work for the other person. We
Hmm.
can make suggestions, but like you said, trust is so key. So until we have trust, making a suggestion will generally fall on deaf ears anyway, because they're like, well, why would I listen to what you've got to say? So it's about relationship building. So in answer to your question, yes, I am acutely aware of my rescue personality, which every upside has a downside and every downside has
Oh,
an
of
upside.
course.
You know, it's, I think, in anything, especially negotiation and even just any communication, the more conscious you are of who you are and how you react, the better you will be in that circumstance and that situation.
Ask that questions because that's been an Achilles heel of my career, within leadership development, starting as a coach at the age of 18, Richard Branson's call center. And I was drawn to that profession because I liked helping other people. And I've learned, and as I say, it's always a journey, not a destination. It still is, that the rescuing isn't the goal. And I'm always drawn back to the drama triangle and the winner's triangle when I talk about this type of thing. Instead of being the rescuer, we become the coach. That instead of solving the problems for people or wanting to take that pain away or that discomfort away or whatever it is that we ought to, or to feel good in ourselves for rescuing as well, is to flip that on its head and become the coach, enabling that person to rescue themselves. How does that work in a crisis negotiation situation?
Problem solving is key because, especially being a police officer, you're solving people's problems all of the time. Nobody phones up 999 to tell you that they're having a great day. They generally phone up because they've got a problem. So you're very used to going in and working with people to sort the problem out in a very quick timeline. So negotiation is completely different. It's about building relationships. It's about helping the other person to solve the problem for themselves. And that might be as simple as, in that moment, taking a step away from the edge. It might be as simple as somebody who doesn't want to be arrested standing on their roof, threatening to jump off it. It might be for them to come back in through the loft and have that conversation around, step by step, what does actually being arrested look like to you? And how can that improve for your own mindset? It's small steps, small conversations, a little bit each time. And in the coaching world, listening is key. And in the negotiator world, listening is key. There's no
Mhm.
difference. I'm a qualified performance coach, and actually, there's so many skills that I used in negotiation, also I use in coaching. The difference with crisis negotiation, especially in the policing world, is that often the person doesn't want to speak to you. So they
Yes.
won't be the one that's called you. Somebody else will have called you because of their behavior. So then it's about breaking down the barrier to get them to engage with you in some way, shape, or form. Yeah.
And I noticed in the stories that you tell in the book, it's a statement followed by a question often when you are the first piece of communication is, I've noticed, or I'm sensing, or you look distressed, worried. I can understand you're having a bad day. And then you ask a question. Was that always the strategy? Start with an observation and then ask a question? Or was it just a natural pattern that developed?
Yeah, I think it became a natural pattern. When I first started in negotiation, I would say that, and I noticed this when I became the director of UK training, watching police officers start their negotiation journey, I call it, because I'm still learning. This is still my journey. And we're very quick to ask a lot of questions.
Mm,
And I get people to start to question the question.
yes.
When you ask a question, you take the conversation away from the other person and you make it about you, about what you want to know. So
Mm,
for me, it's really important to understand why you're asking the question and what the benefit is to the other person and also to yourself in that question. Times just using observational or factual language is key. Now, don't tell my 17-year-old, but I do this with her all the time because I know when I ask her a question and then another question and then another question, she thinks that I am interrogating her or giving her a police interview. Teenagers don't really like that very much. In fact,
they
I don't think
don't.
many of us like that very
No.
much. Where you do observational language, like I might say to her, well, it looks like you've had a tough day today. And I'll leave it there. I don't need to go into it because she'll reflect on it and she'll come back and she'll either say, no, today's been all right, or she'll just go, it's been a mare day. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Now we've opened the conversation if she wants to talk to me. If she came in and I started saying, what's wrong with you? What's your day
Yeah.
been? Where have you been? What's happened? What's happened to make you so sad? That becomes more of an interrogation where the power of reflective language, both in personal relationships and in crisis negotiation and in leadership, where we
Yes.
talk about, how when we make those small observations in meetings, if somebody raises an eyebrow, it could just be as simple as that. Or I just noticed you have raised an eyebrow when I said
Yeah.
this.
Love that.
Yeah, and I can follow that up with a question if I want to, or I could just leave it there. But
Yes.
it's having questions with purpose and being
Yes.
conscious about why you're asking them rather than just asking the question.
Yes. And when we think about having, radical, honest, purposeful conversations, which I do a lot of that in the workplace as well. Noticing something, stating an observation is grounding in logic rather than focusing on emotion straight away. And again, it's that trust element, isn't it? And let's talk about listening. Because quoting you again, when we think about communication, it's maybe a subconscious thing. We're usually focusing on what we want, our agenda. But in crisis negotiation, it's about what they want. And you told the story of your first negotiation situation where in your head you had it kind of figured out what you wanted to say, how it was going to play out, that you were going to walk in as I think you said like the
Yeah.
hero. And it didn't go that way. If we could just briefly touch on that story, if you're able to tell that story, your first negotiation.
Yeah, sure. So I get a call in the middle in about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and I'm not expecting it. I've been a negotiator for about a month. I went on a really intensive 2 week course. That course changed my life because what they did, and it's funny because I was talking to a young man the other day who's just recently become a negotiator, and he literally said this to me. He went, "Oh my goodness, on that 2 week course, they just took everything I believed to be true and turned it on its head." And I was like, "Hang on a sec, I've heard those words before." Because it's true. They take your belief system and you think you're honestly, 20 years policing, I thought I was a pretty good communicator. So when they taught me these new skills, I was like, wow, that's amazing. A completely different way of listening, a completely different way of reflecting, but a way of building relationships very quickly in very challenging circumstances. So eventually my phone goes. I'm excited to use my new skills on my first ever call. And as I'm waiting for a fast car to take me to the call, I have all those thoughts going through my head, like heroin negotiator arrives on the scene, is able to have a great conversation. The young man listens to her, she listens to him, and off they go. Now, this young man had just come out of prison for grievous bodily harm. He'd gone round to his ex-partner's address. They'd had a heated emotional conversation. She was alleging that he had assaulted her and he'd taken the child without her permission. There's a car chase around London. Now he's surrounded by police officers, refusing to talk to anybody, locked all the doors and holding the child up as a shield. And I was excited because I was like, yes, I'm going to go. I'm going to save life. I'm going to make a difference in the world. I'm going to use these incredible skills because I'd had an epiphany on that 2 week course, but this was just what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I couldn't believe how I'd never been taught the power of communicating in a different way. So when I arrive, of course, he doesn't see me as a heroin negotiator. I've learned a lot since that first negotiator, and I'm guessing, although I've never spoken to him, but I should imagine he saw me as a white, middle-aged, middle-class woman and probably thought, well, what on earth are we going to have in common? You're going to take my child away from me, and you're going to send me back to a place that I didn't go. So this conversation that I'd made up in my head about how it was going to go and the result, 8 hours, and he said two things. One was, you don't understand, and the other one, I'm not going to repeat for your viewers. But yeah, so that whole story was in my head. And I was like, goodness, I walked away feeling like I was a failure, a complete failure from that conversation. I thought I hadn't grasped the skills, what was it all about? But of course, this was part of a learning process. And the more conversations that you have that are difficult, and you go, well, that didn't go very well, that's the opportunity to learn because it makes you think about what part did I play? We're very quick, I think, sometimes to go, well, they weren't listening to me. He was clearly wrapped up in his own world, all of those other things. But what is the part that I played? And I realised that I'd looked at that whole conversation from my perspective, my belief system, and I hadn't stopped and gone, what does the world look like for him? And how can I then use that in my first conversation with this young man to show him that I am listening and that I'm there for him?
Yeah. There's a few things that come up there. First is that one of the things that you said that you've learned through negotiation is that everybody has a story. We all have a story. We all have our own map of the world as a result of our story. And it's coming from that viewpoint that can really help us when we are entering into any type of situation. The other, which in some of my training courses, I use the push-pull influence model. And when we're thinking about our agenda, influencing people of our agenda, we're using push. And in some situations, in certain situations, yes, that does work. But in a situation where we need to break down barriers and establish trust, we need to use a pull
Mm.
approach, which is putting ourselves in the shoes of the other person, holding as much safe space as possible, fully listening. And let's talk about listening, because this is a topic that's been a career-long journey, and I'm sure it is for yourself as well. What does truly listening, really deep listening look like? And what is it not in your eyes?
In my eyes, it's probably the hardest thing in the world to do, because you have to put all of your own personal judgments and beliefs to one side. You have to, it's almost like a physical thing. And I notice when I do it now that I make it a physical thing. So like we're having a conversation now, and then if somebody came and stood here and we'd finished, or I was sending an email, I would close my laptop and I would turn. So it became a physical thing. If I'm having a conversation at home around dinner, I will put my knife and fork down and I will focus. And I'm almost like, time to listen. If I'm talking to somebody in my business and I can sense that they are saying some things which are really important to them, I'm like, hang on a sec, I'm not present. I need to be present. So I find a way to switch my brain. That's the first thing about listening, because it's not easy. And we all think we're great listeners. I often get emails from people saying, I love to talk. I think I'd be a really good negotiator. And in my brain, I'm like, I think we might need to focus more on the listening first before we get into the talking. So for me, it's about observation, about everything that's going on from that person. What are they sounding like? What are they looking like? Are there cues that they are giving you? Are they repeating words that you're not picking up on? Are they incongruent? So are their words matching their behavior? Is their tone matching with the words that they're saying? What do I know about this person? What can I see about them? And the more you start to get to know people, the more you can sense when maybe they're not feeling quite in their space.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's I think it's incredibly powerful, but it's not me telling you what to do. It's not me solving your problem for you. It's not me giving my opinion. And boy, I love humans, but boy, are we quick to give an opinion, even when it's not asked for. And I absolutely include myself in that. Sometimes I have to go, stop. This is all about me. I'm making it all about me and my opinion. And yeah, it's hard. I think it's really hard.
It is hard. And I find I'm being tested in a new way, in a different place, in a different situation, even if, I feel like I might have nailed it in some areas. My daughter's emerging into teenagehood, and that's just taken on a whole new need for listening in a certain way. And I think it's that ability to, I call it like the 360 listening, where, we are creating a clear 360 space without our beliefs or judgments or even the next question we want to ask, and holding that for someone to feel safe, to speak up, and so they feel seen, heard and understood, because we all just want to be understood, right?
Yeah, we do. And we all just want to be heard. How many times do you hear people saying, you're not listening to me, you're not hearing me, I don't feel heard? And because when we feel heard, we feel valued and validated. And we feel valued and validated, we feel like we've got a space and a place in the world, and that we matter. And what human being honestly doesn't want to feel like they matter?
It's an innate driver. It goes way back.
Yeah.
There's something I want to touch on, which I'd love to get your views on, in terms of ethics, right? So we've spoken about what I call compassionate hesitation, where our drive for empathy can supersede the purpose that we're trying to achieve. And it can go against us. It's a huge strength, amazing strength, but it can be flipped over and it could go against us. Then there's the other side, where we might need to use tactics in order to get the result that we want. And in a crisis situation, that might mean walking the line of the truth, or being slightly deceptive to get the person to do what you need them to do in order to save their life,
Mm.
or get them to take an action that's going to resolve the situation. but it might mean maybe manipulating the situation or being deceptive. Now, I'd love to get your thoughts on this because, I listen to all sorts of true crime podcasts. I'm listening to Kill List at the moment, which is an amazing podcast. And the tactics they're using to get people to sort of confess are quite deceptive and manipulative.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, mainly FBI.
Yep.
But what are your thoughts on that? And when you were in these situations, did you ever have to tell a white lie to get them to step off a ledge? Did you ever have to bend things slightly to manipulate the situation to get to the end result?
As a negotiator, we are always taught not to lie. And the
Hmm.
reason that we're taught not to lie is because if you get caught in the lie, especially in a crisis situation, that person will never trust you again.
Right.
Never trust you again. And they won't just not trust you, but what happens if a month down the line they have another crisis and somebody turns up to talk to them? They're never going to trust them. So we always teach don't lie. And that's the same in when you start to look at slightly different things like the world of kidnap or the world of international negotiation, things are slightly different. But again, if you get caught in a lie, then the whole world will come crashing down and all trust will be broken. Yeah, so it's very interesting. And it's very interesting because it took me a long time to think slightly differently around this. So when somebody is suicidal or you're talking to them on a ledge, and it's me, it's my belief system that wants them to live. It's not their belief system, it's my belief system.
Right.
So and that's a real, because that is such a strong value of mine to save life. It's almost like you make it it's almost like, well, how can that person not want to live? So it took me quite a long time to work this out. And one of my best lessons was when I was talking to a young girl on the edge of a building, and she said, "Nobody cares about me." Now, in my world, I'm really lucky. I have relations that care about me. I have family. I have friends. I have a really supportive group, and always have done throughout my life. I'm incredibly privileged and incredibly lucky to have had that. So, of course, as a young rookie negotiator, I'm like, well, I care about you
Right.
because I want to show this young girl that there is more to life and that I care about her.
I
So you can
get that.
imagine that, yeah. And I think a lot of people would do that. And I'll give you an
Is that
example.
rescuing?
Is that rescuing? Is it
Mm.
showing care?
Mm.
What it's doing is looking at the world from my perspective.
Fair enough.
And now I've conflicted her belief, which is no one cares about me. So the response I get back, of course, is an emotional pushback. How dare you? How can you care about me? You don't know who I am. You know nothing about me. She's absolutely right. Absolutely right. If I changed the language slightly and just used reflective language and said something along the lines of, sounds like you're really lonely, now I'm connecting at a much deeper level.
Yes.
And I'm connecting with her. And since that negotiation, in other negotiations, that's the sort of language I use. And it's far more powerful. It's a top tip for if you have a teenager in your life as well. It just works the same. I'm a step parent. And so I've known Meg since she was 6. And one of the biggest things I learned is that when you love and care about somebody, you just want to wrap them up. You want to
Yes.
wrap them up and you want to keep them safe.
Yeah.
So when they come home from school and tell you what an awful day that they've had, or that Mary, the most popular kid in the world, has just called them out in the dinner line queue and said that they're ugly, our instinct is to go, you're not ugly, you're beautiful. Mary doesn't know what she's talking about. And that's great and lovely. However, if we just use reflective language first and recognise how they're feeling and said something along the lines of, it sounds like you've had a really tough day and were probably embarrassed in front of your friends. Now you're connecting at a different level, more in depth, not so superficial, making it about you, making it about them, far more powerful.
It is, and then again, it's being authentically truthful
Yeah, it
because
is.
you're not using any deceptive language to try and get the result you want. That it can be achieved by being assertive, empathetic, and ethical, without the need for any type of deception. And I'm drawing parallels here back into the world of leadership. because, you know, ambitious, challenging environments can sometimes mean that we feel like we might need to employ tactics to achieve the very ambitious, pressured strategic goals. I'd like to hear a little bit more because you were 20 years in the force before you moved into negotiation, and then you were 5 years volunteering, as in so like part-time,
That's right.
on
Yeah.
top of your day job
Yeah.
before you became a full-time negotiator in a team of 6, this the special unit at the Met. Then you moved into becoming the educator for negotiators. And when did that finish in terms of that particular role?
So I when I left policing in 2018, so I retired. It was a natural. I'd done 31 years as a police
Wow.
officer. It was a natural retirement. I always
Yes.
tell people that I joined at the age of 5, obviously, to be this young, to have got through 31 years. And I ended up setting up my own businesses. And when I set those businesses up, so just randomly, I bought my local village garage.
Yes.
Yeah, which was a random conversation with the owner of the village garage whilst my car was in for a service. So I ended up buying the village garage, and I ended up converting the car showroom into a coffee shop and a gym and keeping the garage workshop.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it's just complete. I don't recommend anybody sets up 3 businesses in one. I really don't, especially when
Before a
you've got,
pandemic.
especially before a pandemic. And I'm really glad because the timing of the coffee shop was perfect. So I'm a great believer in everything happens for a reason. That was meant to be at that time, and that coffee shop became the center for people to be looked after, especially those who were really vulnerable, and to
Yes.
have conversations. So some of
Yes.
the people that we were serving food to, they didn't see people all week. So we'd come along with our Friday takeaway and we'd have a conversation. That was a real privilege. But I was starting to notice I was using the same skills, and I'd never really thought about it. I'd always thought I use the communication skills dealing with people in crisis. I'll use them when I'm teaching negotiation. And I found myself using them because I was always practicing. So I'd have conversations with people on the train, try and find out. I would be the one that would talk to the people everybody else was avoiding deliberately, because I made myself step out of my comfort zone, and I made myself have those difficult conversations. Not all the time, don't get me wrong. Sometimes I was just like, no headphones in, book out, I need to switch out. But sometimes I would deliberately, consciously practice. I was thinking, there's a lot of people in my little village here that are in crisis before pandemic, so you can imagine what it was like in pandemic. People that had got cancer diagnoses, people who were struggling financially, people whose cars had failed the MOT and it was the end of the world, not because the car had failed the MOT, but because how were they going to go and see their mum in hospital? So everyday life with my team in leadership, having conversations with people that were different from me. I was very used to policing background of, okay, we just get on with it. Very can-do attitude in policing. You just get on with it, whether you're having a good time or a bad time. Just get on with it. And suddenly I was working with people who didn't just get on with it, but wanted more rationale about what was happening. I was introducing change, so I was getting emotional pushback on change. And I was like, wow, hang on a sec, I really need to dig in to these negotiation, communication skills. And a friend of mine once said, Nick, it doesn't matter what business you're in, at some stage we're all in the business of people. So at some stage we're going to have to really tap into our communication skills to be able to build relationships. Fascinating.
And how is that? Because I know, so throughout the pandemic, you became that hub of communication. And then what have you been doing recently, in more recent years, in terms of using these fantastic, crucial skills to help people within the corporate world? What does that look like?
So I help a lot of organisations and a lot of individuals around difficult conversations about managing change, about dealing with conflict. I do a lot of keynote speaking. I do a lot of work with GPs and head teachers. I have the privilege of working with a company called Symbia, who have a year-long program that go into organisations. And I've just last year, I was like, oh, I feel like I could do a little bit more here. And people were very interested in this whole, what does the course look like? What happened? that I've just set up we've run 2 of them so far. They've been women only. Next year we're running 3. 1 will be mixed and 2 will be women only. And we take them on a journey, an immersive journey from Sunday night to Wednesday lunchtime, where they pretty much go on a hostage and crisis negotiation course without the policey bits. They have live scenarios where they have to use the skills. So we teach exercise, we put them under pressure. They work in teams. The feedback we've got, it has been phenomenal, transformative. People are saying to me, this has changed my life. This has changed how I deal with people at work. This has changed my relationships. This has changed how I speak to my children. It's been, again, it's a privilege to be able to share those skills with other people and see them develop and grow.
Fantastic. And the setting is a lovely setting as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. It's a converted. So I'm all about charity. I'm all about community, using local businesses. So we stay in a hotel, which is a local business in Bedford, and we stay in this beautifully converted church, which is run by a charity who look after underprivileged children to give them experiences that they wouldn't have. And so we're there on our own in this. Well, it's stunning. It's just, you sit there and we've got surround windows, and you can see over the countryside as you're learning and reflecting and changing and growing.
Just sounds like absolute heaven to me, the topic, the
Yeah,
surroundings. And
yeah.
we'll make sure that in the show notes there's a link
Thank
so
you.
that people can find out about that. Nicky, I could talk to you all day, and I have loved this conversation. It's just so aligned with everything that I do and that I'm about, and the work that I do in the corporate world. And it's just so fantastic to hear how these universal skills are being shared. These crucial skills are being shared so that anybody can benefit from them in so many different areas of our lives. And I'm so passionate about it because harnessing the power of my words and using them differently has been just life-changing for me. And I always end our conversations by asking, what words have changed your life?
So I think the biggest quote, apart from the Maya Angelou one around, people will forget what you said and forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made you feel, is this: that people who feel listened to are more likely to listen to you. So people who feel listened to are more likely to listen to you.
Boom, mic drop. Yeah, absolutely. That, I think, is the thread, the golden nugget through all of this. And the biggest stumbling block that we all have because of our human brains, and the most simplest thing we can change that can have very dramatic results for the better. And I couldn't think of a better quote to leave this conversation on than that. Thank you for sharing your stories. And as I say, for anybody who wants to get in touch with Nicky, we'll leave all the information in the show notes.
Thanks, Helen. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.